good, and welcome back to This Is Horror. It is great to have you here to talk about Everybody Knows.
Thanks for having me. It's really good to be back. I'm glad we get to finish this conversation.
Yeah, so I thought to begin with, of course, in Everybody Knows, one of the main characters that we're focusing on is May Pruett. Now, she works for a crisis management firm. And I understand that in terms of preparing for this book, you actually spoke to somebody who worked within a crisis management firm too. So I'm wondering, I mean, what kind of dealings have you had with people such as this, both for the prep and then generally in life?
Well, generally in life, I have not had a huge amount of contact with these kind of people. Um, uh, Sorry, I'm making this difficult. I haven't in my real life. I haven't had a lot of contact with these people, but I had a friend who is a former journalist who knew somebody in one of these firms who was also a former journalist, which is not unusual. A lot of PR people start as journalists and then go where the money is. And so that's how I made this connection with the person that I spoke to. I used to be a music journalist. I've dealt with PR people, but the much more benign version of like band reps and, people who email you to make sure you find out about the concerts that are coming to town. And I even hired a PR person for Everybody Knows to help publicize the book, because one thing you learn by doing all this is that stuff is hugely important. And again, there's a huge difference between a normal PR person and a crisis manager who is really oftentimes dealing not just with bad people, which we're all familiar with those stories, but also with bad corporations. So there's a thing that is mentioned in the book. There's a scene fairly early on where May goes to a staff meeting and they kind of run through all of the different jobs that the crisis management firm is working on that week. And that really is a laundry list of real things that crisis management firms do, including rehabilitating bad men. And also, though, they talk about there's a strike going on at a warehouse, or a possible strike. There's a unionization move, and they are working to smear the union reps because they are being hired by the company and they don't want, a union. So that's something else that crisis management firms and black bag PR people do is not just keep stories out, but aggressively push stories in the interest of powerful people. And, when I talked to this person, their position was, we're just like defense attorneys. Like, everybody has the right to a defense, and therefore everybody also has a right to have their side of the story told, which you almost buy for a half a second before you realize that, like, we have public defenders. Like, we actually do give poor people lawyers because we believe that they have the right to a defense. We don't give poor people crisis management firms. Only rich people get that. So the idea that this is somehow a right that is equal to being defended in a court is bullshit. It's just justification after the fact, And I will say that, like, my experience with these people, I write May as a character who knows she's doing something that's morally questionable, but it's exciting and she's paid well and it's conflicting for her. That's not the experience I've had interacting with people in this field. Is they don't have. I think that's the truth about a lot of crime fiction, is we want to give feelings to sometimes people who often are just flat and shallow and like, oh, I do it because I get paid really well. And that by itself is not a great motivation for a character in a book to just do it for the money. So we are always, but sometimes that's just it. I found this job. I have a communications degree. This paid better than that. And so this is what I do. And now I've built after the fact justifications for it,
Yeah, and I think something that you deal with in this, and you dealt with as well, I think, in She Rides Shotgun, certainly a little less kind of in your face, but is this idea of truth and versions of the truth, and does truth even matter? And I mean, I wonder, first of all, how much do you personally think truth matters? Are there any kind of lines on that? Is it a less cut and dry answer than one might assume? And how much do you think, any of us, or if we're to be absolutely honest and authentic, how often are we even being truthful anyway? And are there just a number of masks that we wear for different roles?
Well, I think that is a great starting point for this because, and everybody knows particularly, there's this idea of masks and things
Mm,
beneath the surface, but something that I think is articulated in the novel, and at least I mean for it to be articulated, is sometimes the secret self. We all assume that there's like the mask that you wear, and that's fake. And then there's your secret true self, and that's the truth. But my belief is that the mask is as much you as the thing that's inside you. And again, like May kind of justifies what she does in the book by feeling bad about it. So if she secretly feels really bad about it, that must mean that secretly she's a good person and that's the truth. And the things that she do on the surface is a lie. But I actually think that there is no singular self. Like like the masks are all that's there. And I mean, to get real highfalutin with it, if you get to like, Lacanian thought of like the idea that there is a factual real world out there that comes through our senses and therefore is distorted and then goes through our subconscious and is distorted even more. I do think you get to a place where like the truth matters and you have to strive for it. But like, there's a lot of truths that move beyond facts. Like one of the dumbest things
mm,
anybody's ever said is it Ben Shapiro who says it, who's like, facts don't care about your feelings, right? But here's why that's bullshit. Feelings are facts. Like your feeling about something is a fact. Like that is part of your cognition, is the way you feel about things. And that's not made up. That is a thing happening in your brain. So, I mean, now we're just kind of going off into the philosophy of this stuff, but I do think, when you bring up She Rides Shotgun, you get to an idea that I have of where the facts of the matter aren't that important, which is like the bear. Polly has this pet or this teddy bear
mm,
who, the line she puts is, he isn't real, but he's true.
mm,
And which means that she knows that he's not alive. Like she's not crazy, but it doesn't matter that he's not alive because she treats him like he's alive. And therefore, in a non-factual way, but in a true way, he is alive. And that's the benign version of muddling the fact and truth. And then what May does is the other side of it, where it's not so. But it's the idea that like stories are so powerful that they kind of transcend fact. And I try and deal with it in everybody knows without spoiling the ending for anybody listening. I just want to point out when you get to the very end of the book, part of what May does is her plan is an act of deceit. There is an act of deceit in the final pages that she does to bring about the ending. And that was very intentional. I really wanted to get across the idea. I think there's a lot of mystery novels that act like once the truth is exposed, the story's over because now we all know the truth and that guy's the bad guy, so he can be arrested and we're done. And I don't believe in that world. I think the real world is very clear that just the revelation of the truth doesn't usually end that many things. There's lots of people walking around where we know what they did,
mm,
and if the world doesn't do anything about it, just the revelation is meaningless. And so I really wanted to get those ideas across in an ending that I think people who are used to a traditional detective structure might find that ending unsatisfying. But I find the other kind of ending unsatisfying. So this is what I had to do to tell this story.
mm. Yeah, and talking about looking at what is traditional and then kind of what you want to do, I mean, something that's quite distinct, certainly in my reading, is when we think about LA Noir, we're often looking at these stories that are set in the past. I mean, classic decades would be like the 50s and the 60s, also some in the 80s as well. But here you very much set this in the present and very much with Me Too going on as well. So, I mean, let's talk about the importance of setting Everybody Knows in the present. And was this an element that you knew had to be in the story from the start? Was this an ingredient that came later? Please talk us through this.
Well, I don't remember how much last time we talked about LA Confidential and me doing that pilot. I think we brought it up some. But so I had done the LA Confidential pilot and it had not gone to series. And obviously that's set in the 1950s. And I came out of that process believing that the LA noir set in the 1950s might just be done as an area of storytelling, that Ellroy did it better than anybody ever will. And then in the recent past, there have been some, frankly, LA or Ellroy knockoffs that have not done it well and have kind of created an exhaustion. And also there's just the plain fact that, like, we've been mythologizing the 50s for a really long time now, and the 50s are a long time ago. So actually, I've said this before, you brought up the 80s, but I would love to see more LA stuff, period pieces set in the 80s. And in fact, I'm working on an idea right now with that being done. But so I had come out of LA Confidential with all this Ellroy energy that I really wanted to tell a big epic LA story. But having just done the 50s, it was really important to me. This was the entire, genesis of the novel, was that I wanted to try and figure out what that story looked like today. Because I didn't want to go backwards. I wanted to be right now in the world that I live in and that I'm an active part of. And so to me, that's like the key to the whole thing, and why I think it felt so much fun to write, was because I felt like I was doing something that nobody else had done, as opposed to when you're going through the 50s and you're putting the fedoras on the guys, and it starts to feel... I actually had a rule in the LA Confidential pilot. We didn't let our guys wear fedoras.
Yeah.
Because I felt like the moment you put a fedora on, it feels costume. We've just seen it so many times. I had to have a conversation with one of the actors on set because he came in wearing a fedora that they put on costume. And I had to be like, I'm sorry. I know it's accurate. I know that if we were making a documentary, that people would be wearing hats, but we're not. And I don't want it. But I also feel like that should have been a warning sign for me. The moment you're making apologies for what you're doing, or like that, that maybe this is just an area that is, doesn't need to keep going. And so I wanted the challenge of, like, there's a lot of talk. You hear authors and screenwriters sometimes say that modern technology has made stories too difficult. Cell phones ruin everything. And can you guys hear that wild bird that's flying over me?
I can. Yeah, that's why if anyone can see the video, like, I'm just kind of laughing, like, what the fuck is this? I mean, yeah.
I don't know what that was. We have, actually it's a plot point, and everybody knows that we have wild parrots in Los Angeles that fly overhead. And I don't think that's what that was, but they do live in this neighborhood sometimes. I saw some this morning. So I'm sorry I have to do this outside. I know it's not optimal podcasting, but life comes at you pretty fast. And, and so, like, I think there's lots of LA crime fiction being written right now, but that is set now, but nothing that's doing this kind of big epic take on it. And I think that's what made this feel special to me. And so that's why it was really important to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, in terms of LA as a place, I mean, we've seen like a number of films and books recently, such as Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, perhaps being the most obvious example. But I mean, how important do you think place is in fiction for you? And then what are some elements that are uniquely LA that you thought this absolutely has to be in? This is integral to the story.
I mean, the obvious first part is just the industry itself, that we are telling a Hollywood entertainment story that just wouldn't feel real anywhere else. Maybe you could do something similar in New York, but like, so that was a huge part of it. I love Los Angeles, and I love, you know, the different sections and neighborhoods, and I tried to get as many different ones as I could. It's a very it's very much my Los Angeles. You know, there's not a lot on the west side, and everybody knows because I live farther east, and you know, but I wanted, to me, like Koreatown. I had Chris, the second POV character of Everybody Knows. I put him in an apartment building, and I know exactly where it is because I want him to be able to look down on a very specific strip mall that I think is the epicenter of the best food neighborhood in America. Is just the amount of great restaurants that are that radiate from that location it's ridiculous, and they are 95% Korean. We have, you know, the largest Korean population in the world outside of Korea in Los Angeles, and so, you know, I really wanted to get that in, and just the different elements of food that I gave Chris. Almost, it was important to me to not have a tough guy who drinks whiskey. I just feel like we've seen that. Yeah. So I thought, well, let's have a tough guy who kind of eats too much junk food and gets heartburn. So I have him, you know, eating Korean fried chicken and tacos and Japanese curry and all the things that I eat, because I've been sober for 16 years, so I don't have any connection to like you know, drinking and the hard guy. It's been a long time for me, so I really wanted to do something that felt unique and LA based, you know.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, and so this is like going a little bit away, well, a lot away from the story, but since you mentioned being sober for 16 years, was there like, I guess, what was the moment where you decided you wanted to be sober or you needed to be sober?
Oh, I mean, that's an interesting question. It was, honestly, I was at a function, a business function for my significant other at the time, and some people were playing drinking games, and I started playing the drinking games, and basically woke up the next morning with like this deep shame that, but I, you know, it'd been a problem for me for a while. It wasn't that I had to drink every day. It's just when I drank very heavily, and I used it as a crutch for my anxiety and things like that. And I don't go to AA. I've never done any of that stuff. I just quit on my own. And I saw my life turn around rapidly. Like, I think I went from getting sober to working in television in the space of a year or two. And yeah, it was a pretty huge shift in my life, and I don't miss it at all. And I don't subscribe to whatever works for anybody else. I'm not a cop. If somebody likes going to AA, that's their business. For me, it's never appealed to me. And I feel like one of the things that doesn't appeal to me about it is to kind of live in that space all the time, where they're like, every day they have to get up and say they're an alcoholic. And again, it feels like I'm being critical. If it works for them, great. For me, I live a life where I don't think about it anymore. It's been 16 years. Like, why should I think about it anymore? And I'm not saying I've solved all my problems or that I'm better, but like, I have, you know, I've built a life where I can drink non-alcoholic beer, because sometimes you want something with food that doesn't taste sweet or it's just water. I can do all of that, and I can live around it. And I don't, you know, if I'm I don't go to a lot of bars, obviously. And if I'm hanging out with people and they order their fourth drink, I tend to leave. Not in a huff. I just find like, there will be a moment where somebody will say something sort of funny and everybody else will laugh really hard. And I'll be like, oh, I'm not on the vibe with everybody else anymore because I'm not drinking. And that's usually when I leave, which works out fine. Again, it's not a bad thing. And so, it was just something, you know, I'd started in college. I did drugs before that, but like drugs were never a problem for me. It's alcohol was the problem. And it was too easy, and I'd done it for too long. And I think I mentioned this earlier, I was a rock journalist for a couple of years. That's a great way to go ahead, and if you already have unhealthy drinking habits, becoming a rock critic where your job is to go to bars and nightclubs every night is a really great way to solidify very unhealthy drinking habits. So, so that's what it was. And then, you know, I finally got to a place where, when I was living in New York, where I had that very embarrassing moment where I humiliated somebody who was important to me. And I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I felt like I needed to, but I'm, you know, extremely grateful I guess to myself, that I did, because I needed it, and my life is much better now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I relate to the things you're saying about the rock journalism as well, because I used to work as a heavy metal journalist. So I'm guessing from the kind of things that you've said that maybe the bands that I was like interviewing and reviewing the gigs are a little bit heavier. You know, things like Pantera and Orange Goblin, stuff like that. But
Nice. Yeah.
like, yeah, yeah, maybe the most surreal moment was going to meet like Vinnie Paul at about 1 p.m. In a hotel, and he's just like drinking whiskey, which again, you know, it's showing the issue here with like if you're trying to avoid drinking, that kind of lifestyle, that career is like, I mean, of course, you know, you can say you're not going to, but there are going to be obstacles and social pressure and temptations,
Well,
you know.
I was a music editor for an alt weekly, you know, like an independent newspaper, and it was
Yeah.
literally in my contract that I had to go out to a bar or a nightclub 4 nights a week. So that was
Yeah.
like baked into
Yeah.
my career, was an expectation that I would be at places, and you become a regular, and all the nightclubs want you to write about them, so they will give you drinks, and
Yeah.
you're,
Yeah.
so it's a very unhealthy. If that's a weakness for you, then that is going to be a place where it's going to come up. I really like heavy metal. I'm wearing a Sun hoodie right now.
Yeah.
And like Orange Goblin, I really like. That's my style. Is like that stoner metal into like doom and stuff. That's spend a lot of time listening. Like Electric Wizard, I think is.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
They're the one band I listen to a lot of music when I write, and Electric Wizard is the only band I listen to while I write that has lyrics. Everything else is instrumental, but like their lyrics sink into the music so well that it doesn't distract me. So they're a huge band for me.
Yeah, we've hit on almost one of the danger topics where we could then stop talking about writing for the entire hour. Because I mean, kind of stoner rock and stoner metal. It's one of my favorite subgenres. I think the same for Bob. I mean, like obviously you mentioned Electric Wizard. There's stuff like Weed Eater, which is an amazing name. There's I Hate God, which is kind of tangential to that stuff. There's Sleep, early Grand
I love
Vegas.
Sleep too. I mean, even in the Last King of California, there's a scene where the main character goes to, the band is never named, but he goes to a Sun concert without knowing what he's going to, and gets blown away by it. But I never name the band. I like it better where he just like sees these guys in robes and the giant, stacks of speakers and kind of has his mind blown by it. But because I love that band too. I've taken a lot, and actually I just recently saw them here in LA, and I paid extra to go to the sound check, and I swear that this has a point besides just nerding out, because basically you get to see them play without the robes, without the smoke, just them doing it, and then they do a Q&A, and a lot of the Q&A is for like real gearhead types where they're asking about like the pickups on their electric guitars and things like that. I don't know anything about that stuff, but I've actually done this before, and I saw them give a speech, and somebody asked like if they had any like advice to pass on, and they told this story about having, when they first started being a band, they were in a studio here in Eagle Rock, which is part of Los Angeles I'm in right now. And there was a hippie who had like the studio next to theirs, and he gave them this piece of advice, which was just basically the phrase like beginner's mind, which was like just basically the idea of like, no matter how far into your art you go, always remember like what got you into it, what got you excited about it, like what was your initial love, and never let go of that, and try and, if you get tempted to become artsy or like, become artsy, but don't forget, like, and for what they said, it was like, and so we always try to remember that we got into this like big, loud, dumb, heavy metal. And, when they've done concerts in, art galleries in France or in churches or whatever it is, they just try and always keep that in their heart that like we're here to play big, dumb, loud, heavy metal. And I've always kept that. That's like a piece of wisdom that I think about all the time about like, you know, I like to try and straddle that thing between, like, I like to do genre work that is executed at the level of literary fiction. That's my goal. But I always try and just remember like the things that blew me away about crime fiction when I was a kid or a teenager, you know, in my 20s, like never lose sight of that. Never always try and write a book for that guy, like that, you know, that I do big pulpy crime fiction. And if there's like more things to it than that, that's great. But that's what brought me to the show. And I need to remember that. So I've always been, I really am very impressed by them as artists, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for anyone listening who hasn't heard Sun, they're almost impossible to describe. Like if somebody said, what is this band like? It's like nothing you've ever fucking heard before.
Like, I will sometimes listen to them on record, but I do believe that they are a live band at heart, that like what you can get from listening to a record is one thing, but when you are there live, because again, like you're saying, they're hard to describe, but the basically they play very deep, long, sustained chords of heavy metal guitar, louder than you believe is possible. Like, you know, and when you're standing at the front row and letting it hit you like that, it's really intense and incredible. And like, you know, and again, I do listen to their records sometimes, and I'd recommend that people do so. But like, if you ever get a chance to see them live, you will not walk away going like, "Well, I've seen that before." Like, it's truly on a different level. So I really, I agree. I really, obviously, I'm wearing a hoodie with them on it. And I've got multiple posters in my office from shows I've seen and stuff. So yeah, I'm a big fan of theirs.
Yeah. I guess when I said they were impossible to describe, I meant more like impossible to honestly compare with other bands, because you can literally describe what you're gonna get. But I feel
but you're not capturing it.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, as you say, particularly if you see them live, you're going to feel the music with your entire body, both literally and then more metaphorically. I mean, it's going to go through you. But I mean, I don't know how we even segue back to Everybody Knows, but I
think we just got to do a hard segue. Yeah.
I'm gonna try and segue. I mean, we're talking about originality here and kind of doing their own thing, inventing things. Well, black bag publicist, that is a term that you invented for this novel. So I mean, talk us through that.
Well, you know, I think I just needed a term, and I love the idea. And I think in the initial drafts of the book, I made it a little too of a gag, because I always had it that May carried like a black leather purse, and that was like her signature purse, and it's a black bag. And I kind of like, okay, that's not a necessary component for it, but I just wanted, crisis management is obviously like a term created by people who want to hide what they're doing, you know? So I just wanted like a cooler phrase. And I was also just thinking about John le Carre when he wrote Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Needed a term for the spy who's undercover in another spy agency. And so he just made up the term mole. He just said, you call somebody like that a mole. And now that phrase, that using mole in that way, is just part of the English language, you know, that he actually like, and I was just thinking like, again, dream of all dreams is that like somebody else will write an article about an actual crisis management firm and call them a black bag PR firm. And then like it will just spread. So that's the term for it. And then I will have like impressed upon the English language my little contribution. And I think that would be really cool. Because I do think it needs a term that wasn't created by the black bag PR people, which is what crisis management is. That is a term that was made to sound like, well, of course, if you have a crisis, you need to manage it. Who would be opposed to crisis management? And what they actually do requires a little bit more, you know, exploration.
Yeah. And I mean, I love how kind of seedy it is and illicit. And like, I feel like, if you're talking about it, it's like if someone's like, oh, you need a crisis manager, it's like, that doesn't sound so sexy. But if you've got a character in a novel, it's like, what you need is a black bag publicist. Oh, a bit of black bag. Yeah, keep that on the down low. Be quiet. Don't say that aloud in the bar. Gonna get your head kicked in.
And you just know that like, oh, well, they're up to no good. It's called black bag PR. That's not good. You just know that's not the hero isn't riding in on a white horse and saying, I'm a black bag publicist, Like,
yeah.
And again, I just really wanted to try and capture, it's on the corner of the book, just how much of our media is either, PR people pitch article ideas to people, PR people provide written articles to people who are really lazy, who will just copy and paste press releases. They filter everything, they spin everything. I don't think this had happened the last time we talked. If it had, forgive me, but I read an article recently about a show I had worked on.
Right.
And every sentence in it that I knew whether or not it was true or false was false. Like, there was not a single sentence that I read where I said, oh, they got that detail right. And they all got it wrong in ways that were like very obviously massaging the truth to make people look good and to make things seem like the company was in control, and like all of that stuff was going on. And it was such and the thing that amazes me is, and we're all guilty of this, is if you've ever read an article about something about, it's like you're going to see falsehoods and you're going to go, oh, they got all that wrong. They got all that wrong. And then you're going to turn the page, you're going to read a news article about something else, and you're going to believe it all.
Yeah.
And again, like, it's been politicized by people who want to act like, fake news is something that is done to hurt corporations or is done to hurt rich people, which is nonsense. It's almost always the other way. It's always coming from, the capitalist class, the ownership class, all of that stuff. That's who is doing this. And so, like, fake news, I wish it wasn't so politicized, because it's a pretty useful term, but it now it carries too much baggage for that to be the term. So I guess I need to, maybe with black bag PR, I can come up with another term that isn't so nakedly politicized.
Yeah. No, it is so politicized. And also, I mean, I've noticed, and I'm sure a lot of people have noticed too, it's like people will be quick to call out fake news if it's because it's something that they oppose. But if it's fake news and actually this is something that would help their political agenda or their political beliefs, they're pretty silent on calling that out. and and even it's like, well, I mean, if we're to make it American, which, I mean, this conversation is about, well, you're both American. This is set in the US, but there'll be people who let's say that they're like more on the left, and it's like, well, here's this article from Fox that is absolute bullshit, that's fake news, or here's this news story. But when there's another article where it's also problematic, but it's from CNN, little bit quieter about that one. And I just feel that we all need to be more authentic and honest. And it's like, if we're going to call out one thing, then we should call out another thing.
Well, I come from a position of, like, both MSNBC and CNN and Fox, they're all owned by different, very rich people who are all essentially on the same team. And so, I won't start, quoting Karl Marx yet, but like, I'm capable of it. But like, if you really like, yes, it's all the same. And it can filter from those big issues that we're talking about now to, like, anytime you read a news article and the newspaper says, like, whoever it is, it doesn't matter. They could be a famous person, whatever. Release a statement through a spokesperson. That person had nothing to do with that statement, like nothing. When we all know it for a fact that, like, when the phrase "said through a spokesperson" is essentially a lie. It means if they were being totally honest, they would say, that this famous person paid a spokesperson to say X, because that's who's actually crafting the message. The person in question might have never even read the message. It's just, but we all treat it again like that is a statement that they made, and we all know that that's not true. And when you start multiplying that unto infinity, where you get people reacting to statements that somebody never made, well, now their reaction is a lie because the initial statement never really, you know what I mean? Like it, and you get to see where it just becomes this like miasma of falsehood, where we're just talking about total bullshit all of the time. And so, I think all of that is like really important. And I'll also say, like, pretty hard to dramatize. So I think that was one of the real tricks of Everybody Knows, was how to dramatize that kind of stuff in a thriller in a way that is entertaining and feels immediate, as opposed to like kind of drifting off into abstraction the way it's so easy to when you talk about these things.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, that what was that, Bob? Did you say something, Bob, or did I just hallucinate Bob saying something?
You did.
Okay, cool. Well, that's great. It's too fucking early here, isn't it? No wonder you look so confused.
And I was like, going, huh? Did I say something? No.
I think I threw in a yeah there that you might have taken as Bob. But,
obviously, like I took your Ozark yeah as a good old Texan. Oh boy, here we go, folks. Anyway, well, the people on the video who watch the video can enjoy that bizarre moment, but I mean, throughout the novel, you've got this chorus, this repeating phrase and idea that nobody talks but everybody whispers. I mean, this is central to both the novel and Hollywood. Now I'm wondering, as somebody living and working in LA, how does this mentality affect your well-being, and how present do you think it is in reality?
Oh, it's 100% present reality. Yeah. I live that reality every day. I live the reality of, working in an industry where we talk about the famous people all the time amongst ourselves. And that's just whether you're on set and you're sitting around the camera, the video village, which is where you watch the camera work and whatnot on a set, or if you're in a writer's room. Everybody has a natural curiosity, because we're also fans, right? At the same time, everybody wants to know who else have you worked with, and were they monsters? And we talk about it all the time. And so I meant that, but none of us are going to the newspapers and saying this stuff. And we were talking about, I will not name the names here, but like I was talking about this week, is the concept of the open closet, which is the idea that there are people, and again, you hear rumors about it or whatever, like people who are openly gay in their private life, but not openly gay in the media. And, particularly a lot of male actors, because there is still, unfortunately, there is a stigma about, a gay man, that there are certain roles that they just don't give action roles to gay men, or whatever it is. And you can be in a writer's room and have a very open, I've met his partner, they're lovely, whatever. And you would never say that to a newspaper, and you shouldn't. Like, that is a case of like a good, because that's their choice. They get to decide how they're presented. But the much uglier flip side of that is that, you just sit around and go, well, how are they? And it's like, well, I'm not talking about the same people at all. It's just saying, like, in a general sense, like, oh, you worked with X, what are they like? And then you hear the story, and everybody goes, the phrase that you use in a writer's room, okay, this is, cone of silence. And then you say whatever it is, and you talk about the celebrity, and then everybody understands that you can tell other people in real life who you meet about this stuff, but you would never say it in the media. And so that idea that nobody talks, but everybody whispers, the specific well, again, I'm not comfortable saying the names, but I'll say the specific inspiration for that phrase for me personally was I was working on a TV show. This was years ago, and I had heard stories, and multiple stories in that same way that I just described, that there was a showrunner in another show for the same studio who was a monster, who was abusive to women and embarrassed them in the room and said inappropriate things. And I was having drinks with an executive from that studio, and I just said, hey, none of I wasn't being a hero, wasn't being a whistleblower. I was just saying, like, hey, just so you know, I heard this rumor that this guy is a real monster. And the executive just kind of gave this look of like, yeah, like, I know, like, a very resigned, like, yes. And then like 3 or 4 years later, when that guy was finally taken to task and he was exposed, that same studio and the people who worked with him put out statements of like, we had no idea that this was going on. I was like, and I knew for a fact that was not true because I knew about it. And I was just some other guy at some other, show for the same studio. So the idea that like, that anybody involved, like, there was no reason why I, as a mid-level writer on a different show, should have inside knowledge that wasn't available to all of these powerful people who are now just acting like they were shocked to hear this stuff. So, it's very real. And I think that experience, not just that specific one, but that's like the one that really sticks with me, was really intrinsic to, deciding what part of Hollywood I wanted to write about. And, I didn't want to write about it from the perspective of a TV writer who can hear about it, but not really do anything. And I didn't want to tell it from the perspective of a victim, because I feel like there are other people who can do that and do that better than me. And so I wanted to basically give somebody my conflicted feelings about working in Hollywood, but kind of make them more complicit, more involved, and more like in the mix. And that's really where May's story came from.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too, I mean, how did you balance when writing this, making like important social commentary and statements on society, on power, on money, but also ensuring that, you were creating this hard-boiled page turner?
Well, I mean, I think luckily for me, my instincts always go towards the hard-boiled page turner. And so that was the natural place. And I always feel like I'm very aware of this. Like, I like thought-provoking work. I like intelligent work. I like work with ideas in it. But to me, like, those kind of things are like the bass notes in a song. Like, if you don't have them, the song becomes hollow and empty. But if that's what dominates the song, it's probably not going to be a very good song. Like, if it's just, which is weird because we were just talking about sun, but I mean something very different. I just mean like, that like, it's something like that. My point is that the themes and ideas are there to serve an exciting story, not the other way around. The other way around is really good recipe for very bad fiction. And I just think like, to me, my mantra is like, everything needs to serve the story. That I think some people try and act like stories are only worthwhile if they have a message, or if that's what makes a story worthwhile. And my belief is that stories are intrinsic good unto themselves. Like people want stories, they need stories. To produce stories that entertain people is a good, period. That's all you need. And if it has a theme, I think that enriches the story, makes it deeper, makes it resonate more. And that's good because it serves the story, not because you're going to change the world with it. Now, I have friends who are like activists and have a different view than this. And that's fine. They can, again, I'm not a cop. People do whatever they want. But for my work, I always want the ideas to be there to make the story have more resonance, not to think I'm going to change the world with what I'm doing, other than changing it in the very good way of putting a good book in the world.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we spoke quite a bit about May, but we haven't spoken so much about Chris. So I'm wondering, what was, as just a broad kind of starting point, what was the inspiration, or how did Chris enter your life?
Well, Chris is a more typical character than May is. I think, you know, you have seen his type. He is, you know, very much a character who, you know, is drawn from like James Ellroy. I think there's very clear antecedents in Ellroy's work. But what I really wanted to do was bring that guy into the present and demythologize him quite a bit. I hope this is apparent in the book that I just want to suggest a guy like that who's really good at violence and not much else isn't actually that useful when you get to the end of the story. Right. That I never have, and I hope I never do, write a novel where the ending is decided by who's a better puncher than another guy, or who's a better shot than another guy. Because to me, that's meaningless. Like, oh, what a coincidence that the person who was morally right also happens to be the best shot. Like that is really, and again, there's thousands of movies where that's how it ends. And there are a lot of movies like that I love, but I just feel like, to me, that's just profoundly uninteresting. And so I really wanted to play with that. And I also, and this is where I will get, this is probably the most nakedly political thing in the book is, I have fairly radical ideas about what I think police are good for, which is not much. And specifically, I have a real problem with the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department, which are pretty nakedly bad organizations. And so I really wanted to, get in the stuff about the sheriff's gangs, which is it's headline news in LA like this week. Like they're still being investigated. You know, the new sheriff is saying he's going to eradicate them, which I will believe when he does it and not a moment before. And it won't happen. And so I wanted to tell that story and make Chris somebody who needs redemption and yet is not granted a total redemption by the end of the book. I don't think he is. I think that I give him an ending where he can see a path out, but and I don't want to talk about the end too much, but it's based on the fact that he's not going to be able to do what he has done in the past anymore, that he is not going, and again, I also, I didn't want to be so nakedly political that I didn't make him sympathetic. I think he's very sympathetic. And like May, both of them are people who admit to the wild thrill that doing these things give them. And I think that's really important, is to say that people can do things that both repulse them and excite them at the same time. And that those two feelings don't just go side and side. They're actually connected to each other, that like there is something thrilling about doing something that's repulsive. And there's something repulsive about being thrilled in some ways. Like, that there's a weird sexual energy at certain points that like shouldn't maybe be the moments that are sexual, and like, their relationship is very fraught because of that. But I think that I hope that I did something new with Chris. Like I said, I think on the surface, when you describe him, he is a muscle-bound guy who does favors for rich people. He's a fixer who used to be a cop. I mean, that's Pete Bondurant from Ellroy's books. It's a lot of other. It's the Showtime show that was just on the air.
Ray Donovan.
Thank you. And so I hope that, again, like my decision to not have him have a drinking problem, to have him eat food, that he has these heart attack fantasies that are anxiety based, that again, you don't normally see a tough guy kind of like having panic attacks, frankly. I hope I did something new and interesting with him, because I really did like him as a character. And I knew that like every book I've written has had both a male and female protagonist with alternating viewpoints. And I think that's fairly unique in crime fiction, I think, particularly to do it kind of as a pattern. And the new book I'm writing now has, for right now, 2 male POVs and 1 female POV. So it's, I started with She Rides Shotgun, and I have it in Last King of California. I have it Everybody Knows. I have it in the new book. I like living in both those places in fiction, because I think there's a lot they do one or the other. Obviously a lot of the stuff I'm drawing from is very masculine and comes from a male point of view. Ellroy never did a female protagonist. And most of those stories, even like In a Lonely Place, which is like a very famous female penned novel of LA noir, the protagonist is male, so I really wanted to mess with that. And I think the other thing that is, after Ellroy, one of my absolute favorite crime fiction authors is Megan Abbott, and I really like trying to fit myself in the space between Ellroy and Abbott. I think that's like a very interesting space that, again, I don't know anybody else who's trying to hit that Venn diagram the way I am. And so I think that really, again, helps me carve out my space that is unique to anybody else.
Yeah, and talking about Ellroy, I mean, we mentioned last time that your literary agent is Nat Sobel. I feel that we almost glossed over that, or we didn't follow up. We didn't talk about it. We didn't explain for anyone who isn't aware just how fucking important in, the history of LA Noir and hardboiled Nat Sobel is. I mean, for goodness sake, American Tabloid is dedicated to him. So, I mean, he's clearly, the dream agent for you. But how on earth did this dream become reality? How did you meet? How did he come to be your agent?
That's a great question, and I love to talk about Nat. As you said, like Nat's hugely important, and I often refer to him as he's like the lion of crime fiction agents. There's no second place. You're talking about a guy who helped discover James Ellroy, who was Lawrence Block's agent at one point. He was he's just the list of people that he has represented is a who's who of crime fiction over the last 40 years, and Nat's amazing. He's told me stories about he was in the room with Ellroy when Ellroy created his literary style that became apparent in LA Confidential, where the book was too long and he had to cut a certain amount of words from the novel. And Ellroy refused to cut any plot. He refused to cut any characters. And they were just sitting there looking at the manuscript. And suddenly Ellroy just started crossing out words, and making it tighter. And that's where that Ellroy, that super hard-boiled style, that you really see that difference between, the Big Nowhere and Black Dahlia, and then LA Confidential and everything after, was born from necessity. But once he had done it, it was like, oh my God, I found this like incredible style that's so good for hard-boiled. And Nat was literally in the room just watch that happen. So, and actually I've just got the new Ellroy biography, Love Me, Fierce and Danger, which I mentioned on 2 pages of, which first thing I did was open up the index and found my mentions, which is all about the pilot. But Nat's all through the book, and I haven't talked to him about it yet, but I want to read it and talk to him about it, because, he's really important, not just to Ellroy, but a lot of other people at one point or another. Nat was their agent in this world. So I met him through Thuglit, which I think I talked about a little last time, is Todd Robinson's online magazine. And Nat, being a dedicated student of crime fiction, found out about Thuglit, started reading it, and started reaching out to people. And I was one of those people. He'd read one of my short stories, one of my early short stories, and liked it, and asked me if I had a novel. And at the time, I was had written a really bad novel that will never be published. And he read it, and he gave me some notes, and then I tried to execute those notes. And again, this novel was bad to the bone. It was not ever going to be good. And after 4 or 5 turnarounds with Nat, I was like, I'm sorry. Thank you for taking your time with me, but I don't think this novel is working. And I put it to bed, which was really hard, because when I first got that email from, as you say, James Ellroy's literary agent, I was like, the break has happened. I'm now on my path to success. And it was a much longer path, because that was a long time ago. And then we didn't speak for a couple of years because I didn't have anything to show him. And then I was, I'd been on the Mentalist for a while. This was all before I was on the Mentalist or anything. And then I moved out to LA, and I was on the Mentalist for a while, and I got bored, and I did the self-pubbed version of my short story collection called American Death Songs, where I just got bored and decided to collect a bunch of my short stories and put them out in a little edition called American Death Songs. And somebody gave Nat a copy of American Death Songs. And he reached out to me again. He's like, why did you self-publish this? We could have published this. We could have sold it. And I was like, really? I was like, nobody sells short story collections for crime fiction. And he's like, well, tell you what, write up a 2-page description of whatever novel you're thinking about writing next, and we'll sell this as a 2-book deal. And I wrote up a 2-page description of what would eventually become She Rides Shotgun. And he went out and he sold them. And I was like, well, good job, Nat. I mean, he's amazing. And so that was, so he's been my literary agent ever since. And him and his wife, Judith, who handles the international sales for them. And he does the American sales. And they are really amazing people who've had an incredible life and really have made like a huge imprint on American crime fiction. And I hope that they get the recognition for that they deserve.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. The story is even more incredible that essentially he read Thuglit, he liked your story, he contacted you. Like,
yes. And he's contacted other people out of Thuglit. I'm not sure if there's anybody that he is still repping other than me that came out of there. I'm not sure. Probably, like, I know a lot of people who are Nat Sobel clients, or so yeah. He said, but no, that's just because this is what he loves. He is out there right now. He sent me a book this week or last week to read, saying, I think you'll love this, and if you love it, give me a blurb and we can use it to try and sell it. He is out there. He's been doing it for a long time, and he's a true student of the art form.
Yeah. And I love that, he has this personal relationship with you and his clients, and contacting you about books that he thinks you'll be interested in, and that he's always, trying to learn, to get better, to master the genre even more. I mean, if anyone could rest a little bit or say,
Yes.
what, I think my education is done, then, I don't think you could criticize Nat for doing that. But he's absolutely not at all. It's like, look, decades ago you discovered Ellroy and you're still learning in 2023. I mean,
no, it's really amazing. He's one of a kind. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And I know that you met James Ellroy, so I'm assuming the story there is probably to do with the pilot for LA Confidential, but it's also my understanding that you have a voice message from him too. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so it was in the period of time after we had shot the LA Confidential pilot. We didn't know if it was going to be a TV show or not, and we had hired some what do they call them, consultants who helped us with the authenticity of the pilot, who were retired cops who came up to me near the end of the shoot and said, hey, we know Ellroy, because he knows a lot of cops. And he's like, and Ellroy would like to meet you. We told him what we were doing, and he wants to meet you. And so I was like, oh, gulp. And so they set it up, and he was introducing LA Confidential, the movie, at the Egyptian, which is this grand old theater here in Los Angeles. And they were like, come to the green room beforehand and meet him. And so I went, and it was him and all of these people who were old retired cops who were all dressed like cops from LA Confidential. And he was, he was very kind to me, but he started with like, so it's on CBS. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, so you can't say, and he just had a list of words you can't say on CBS. Yeah. And I was like, you are correct, James Ellroy. And I was honest with him. And I've said this before, but I was honest with him. I was like, you won't like it. He doesn't like the movie.
Right.
And I think the movie's brilliant. But he doesn't like it. So I was like, if you don't like that, you're not going to like the CBS version. I tried my best. But like, it's not for you. But he was very kind, and I guess I don't remember. I must have given him my phone number, because he did call me a little while later, and just left a message that was very kind, and I've never erased it. I haven't listened to it in a while, so I hope it's still there. My God, I hadn't even thought about that. But like, just it was very thoughtful of him, and then the show didn't go to series, and I didn't feel like I didn't want to call him back, because I didn't want to intrude, and didn't feel like that was what he wanted either. So I hope not. I hope I didn't like turn away a friendship with James Ellroy, but I think he just wanted to say good luck, and it was very kind of him. So yeah.
Yeah, no, you should get that message again and find a way that you can record it, even if it's like an imperfect recording, like you just put the phone on speaker and record it that way. I mean,
you're not wrong. I should do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about how the different phones work. I mean, you could screen capture it and then get a pretty good recording. But yeah, you're talking about, oh, I hope it's still there. Don't leave it to chance. Don't not have a backup of this. What is going on? Why has this not been recorded? Why are you saying, oh, that's a good idea? This is not something that, yeah, but.
If I can add on that, my day job is in the phone industry, and if you do happen to change a carrier, if that's a voicemail, you could potentially lose it. So I would definitely make a recording of it.
That is it had never occurred to me, and now it is very obvious that I am. If I have not already tempted fate, which I'm not going to look on the air and find out if I did.
Yeah, we don't want an actual on-air breakdown.
Pretty amazing, though. I mean, it's that whole, even though it didn't become a TV show, which I really wish it had, it's just, I mean, one of the great things that I'm never going to forget about in my life is that I got a chance to like live in the world of LA Confidential for a while.
Yeah, yeah. And I can't help but have noticed that you said, he was introducing the movie LA Confidential, and then about a minute later, he revealed he doesn't like that movie. So it must be interesting taking the gig to introduce it, but also knowing that you don't like it. But then because it's James Ellroy, I could even imagine him just saying that. It's like, what the fuck are you going to do? I'm Ellroy.
I believe if I read it correctly, I believe that this Ellroy biography that I just mentioned, Love Me, Fierce and Danger, says basically like I said something, and then the guy said, well, if Harper had stuck around for the screening, he would have heard Ellroy unload on LA Confidential, the movie. Because I guess he literally, in that introduction, said he didn't like it. He used to, like back in when it was new, I think he used to play nicer about it, but I think he is now pretty open in saying he doesn't like it. So I think I didn't stick around. I could have, but I was like, how am I going to top? I have a photo with him, me and Ellroy, and like, there are very few. Working in Hollywood, you kind of have a rule of like, don't ask celebrities to pose for pictures with you.
Yeah,
which I've only broken a few times. I did not get a photo of me and Walton Goggins on the set of LA Confidential, which I really wish I have. But I have a photo with when I was working with Michael Chiklis from The Shield. I got a photo with him.
Yeah,
I got a photo with Malcolm McDowell when I did an episode of TV with Malcolm McDowell. Because come on, but you don't ask for the photo very often as a pro. But Ellroy was like, somebody asked, they're like, "Do you want a photo with him?" I'm like, "Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Can we please do that?" It was pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that we're coming up to the time that we have together. Unbelievably, we could have continued to talk about Everybody Knows. We still haven't even spoken about She Rides Shotgun. So I'm impressed the amount that we all have to say.
You know what I would like to do, and maybe like in the future, like I want the book to be out for a while, but I want to do a spoiler-filled episode about Everybody Knows. Because I've never done one. I've never done an interview where we just go, okay, if you haven't read Everybody Knows, you've had your chance, So maybe sometime in the future we can do that. Because I agree, this has been a great conversation, and I feel like we could go, but I probably do need to go. But we don't need to do part 3 right away. But have me back on. This was really fun.
Yeah. Well, something I do want to ask before we go. We said before that this is the most like a screenplay novel that you've ever written. The most like a screenplay story, because if I say like a novel, it's like, what? Well, there's 2 of them. But what do you think one can learn about screenwriting from novel writing, and then vice versa? What do you think someone can learn from novel writing from screenwriting? I guess I'm looking at yeah, go on.
No, I mean, I think from being in television, story mechanics and plot structure is the most valuable thing, and then also being concise. There's an urge in screenwriting to be very concise, but my opposed idea to that is that novel writing, they tell you don't be literary when you're writing a script. I break that rule all the time, but I don't write literary in like long paragraphs or anything like that. Right. I just write well, and I write exciting things, but I try very hard. Some people will tell you like, oh, it's very unprofessional to write a script that's fun to read. You're supposed to just write the bare mechanics of what happened. And that's misunderstanding what a script is for, because a script serves two functions at two different parts of its life. The first function, and the most important one for anybody who's trying to become a screenwriter, is it's a sales document.
Yeah.
You are selling the idea of a movie. And if you are selling the idea of a movie, that fucker better be interesting to read, because the people who are reading them are reading stacks of screenplays every weekend. And if you can, again, not write big, long paragraphs of prose, but if you can make it exciting and fun and have memorable images and the language is nice, that only helps you. Like, that's a really good idea. And then the second thing a script does is it's a blueprint for the actual shooting of the movie or the TV show. And that sometimes figurative language, it doesn't serve you well, but you can always cut that out. You can always say, okay, now it's time for the production draft of this script. And then you can just make it a little more mechanical. That's fine. But people act like, again, I think it's like a fake professionalism of like, well, this script is just supposed to be shot, so don't write it anything but other to be shot. And that's not understanding what your job is at the beginning, which is to sell it. I wish we didn't live in that world, but that's the world we live in. And so it's on you to do that, you know? So I think both of those, I think my screenwriting has made my novels better. I think my novels have made my screenwriting better. I think they're two arts that are complementary in the right ways if you let them be.
All right. Well, screenwriting again is something that, both Bob and I would love to unpack, would love to talk about in depth. So I think that's something we'll probably have to put in a kind of for later, for a future episode. But I think even, what you've just said there are some really invaluable takeaways for people writing screenplays, and dispelling some of these misconceptions about like, well, it's just an instruction manual, and as you say, it's initially, you're selling something, and if you're selling something but writing it like bland soup, it ain't gonna get very far.
I authentically believe that 95% of all writing advice, particularly the kind you encounter online or on Twitter, if you really boil it down, the real lesson is don't do it shitty. People will say, don't use voiceovers, but they mean don't use shitty voiceovers. Nobody says don't use voiceovers like they do in Taxi Driver. Nobody says, like, when it's done well, it's true for flashbacks, it's true for technique, it's true for anything. That's why I don't do a lot of concrete writing advice, because I think it's useless, because I think most writing advice is don't do it shitty, and that means just work on your craft and figure out what's shitty and what isn't, and then execute. Like, that's kind of, frankly, it. I think you can talk about, if you give me a specific script and ask me what's wrong with it and how to make it better, I can do that. And I can talk very abstractly about storytelling as an idea, but that middle ground of just like kind of specific advice is useless, I think, most of the time.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for spending. What was that? Possibly.
No, I was saying, this was awesome. Thank you. I really have enjoyed these. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, me too. Well, where can our listeners connect with you?
I have a newsletter called Welcome to the Hammer Party that I update so infrequently that I'm thinking I need to face facts and figure out maybe I need to cancel it and start doing a podcast of my own or something. Or The way to actually find me though online is on Twitter, Jordan_Harper. That is the place where I can be found and am at most reliably. So please sign up for my newsletter. I swear to God, I will update it someday. But like I've now reached the stage of not updating it that it's starting to feel like okay, what's going on? So yeah, find me on Twitter.
All right. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
No, I mean, I would love to impart some grand wisdom at the end, but I think that stuff about writing advice and don't do it shitty is really about as profound as I'm going to get today. So I really think that stuff's really important. And just, I guess if I had a life lesson about art that I really, and I don't know where you guys are in this, like I want to abolish the phrase guilty pleasures.
Yeah.
I don't have any guilty pleasures. I have things I like, and I'm not embarrassed by any of them, and I would encourage everyone to abandon that idea and just feed your brain what it wants and challenge yourself with new stuff. But if it doesn't resonate with you, don't pretend that you like it. Don't, and keep just feeding the thing that's inside you that needs art.
Yeah. Guilty pleasures.
That's my wisdom.
It just stems from snobbery and elitism and shaming people for liking what they like. And like there's enough negativity in the world. Why the hell would you feel shame for enjoying something you genuinely enjoy?
Well, exactly, and again, I do think it's all snobbery, but snobbery can come from any direction, and that's not real, or that's fake, or that's for real fans love this. If you don't love this, you're not a real fan of the genre, or any of that stuff is just garbage and baloney, and just like what you like and don't apologize for it, and but again, I do believe like challenge yourself, try and find interesting things, and if you watch an art film that resonates with you, then chase that too. Like don't get weak about it. Don't calcify, but don't, like, I've watched 3 or 4 Ingmar Bergman films in my life.
Right.
And I get that it's art. I get that he's brilliant. It does not resonate with me. And I feel like 4 is enough. And I'm moving on. There's lots of art films I do like, but and that's fine. I think that's acceptable. Like life is short. You can't just keep trying to make yourself like Ingmar Bergman or jazz or whatever it is that you think you're supposed to like. And if you like, again, I'm not a cop. If you like Ingmar Bergman and jazz, more power to you. But that is, by the way, obviously my catchphrase at this point in my life is I'm not a cop. So, but I do. That's how I live. If you're not hurting somebody else, I don't care. So go on, watch. When I have like a cold or something, I'm going to rewatch Legally Blonde, which nobody would suspect that I'm a guy who watches Legally Blonde when he's sick or whatever. But I don't know, something about that movie I like, so I watch it. And I'm not embarrassed by it. You know what I mean? What a silly thing to be embarrassed by. That's where I'm at in life.
Yeah. No, I just imagine, your throat starts scratching and you're like, oh, God damn it, I'm going to get ill, but Legally Blonde, baby. So, it's not all bad.
I bring that up. Back before I was sober, I just remember being insanely hungover and going to a movie theater. This is back, you would go to the movie theater to see anything, and being like hungover, having a giant soda and watching Legally Blonde and being just like, this was exactly what I needed. This was exactly the level that my brain is at today. And so that has stuck with me. So that's why I picked that one. But
that movie is comfort food for you.
Exactly.